seahorses are fishes. And so they have a lot of things that are common with fish. Now, I've shown you a picture here of a trout and comparing it to the seahorse. And so almost all other fish live in the water in a horizontal fashion. Seahorses live upright. And so you can see that, you know, they kind of have most of the same structures, but they're just shaped a little bit differently. One thing that's really different is the head of the seahorse is horizontal and the rest of his body is vertical. So compared to other fish, their backbone that would be right here along the center line is bent really sharply right there so that they can look like this. And they can move their neck really well like this, back and forth and up and down, so they can look like a prancing seahorse, a prancing horse. And then being a fish, you know, they have fins like a fish, but not all of the same ones. Most fish have this dorsal fin on top. And so I was going to say the unicorn, the seahorse has the dorsal fin back here, and they use it to propel them forward. So most fish use it to turn, but seahorses use it to make them go forward. And it's a pretty weak fin that doesn't let them swim very fast. So they have to be really quiet and camouflaged in their habitat. And then the other fin that they share with other fishes, is this dorsal fin here that's always right behind the gills. And you can't see that on this yellow fish. Probably because it's a live seahorse and he's swimming, and they are blurry because they move so fast. They move dozens and dozens of times per second. So it's a blur, but you can't see it. So it's kind of right behind where his operculum would be, or the gills. And so you can see the gills really well in this trout. And of course, that's where they breathe from. They don't have lungs. They breathe through these gills that have a lot of oxygen resources. I mean, they have a lot of blood vessels and hemoglobin in their cells that let them take in that oxygen from the water. Other fins are down here. There's the pelvic fins, and seahorses don't have one of those. But they do have this fin here. It's called an anal fin, and it's right behind their anus, which is where they go to the bathroom, of course. And you can't see that in this photo, but it would be right down here. Trout, like most other fish, have a tail, and most fish use that tail to propel them forward in the water very quickly. But seahorses don't have that tail. They just have a really elongated backbone that goes back into a tail, almost like a cat or a tiger. And actually this seahorse here is called the tiger tail seahorse. So that's some of the similarities between seahorses and other fishes, and some of the differences. Here's a piece of art I did, like 12 years ago, but it basically just shows all the different shapes of fishes, and you can see how variable they are. But you can see that the little seahorse is all alone in being upright. So another unique thing about seahorses, besides being really upright, is that they have this bony skeleton underneath that is made of these interlocking plates. And so you see all these plates coming down here, and they're divided up. And there's lots of them in the tail too. And seahorses don't have scales on their skin. Their skin is really smooth. It might be bumpy, but it doesn't have scales like a regular fish. So this picture just gives you a little bit more detail of what the seahorse looks like. And it's talking about some of these parts. There's these spines here, it's eye spine and a nose spine and a cheek spine. And then a special spine on the top called a coronet. And that comes from the word corona, which actually is Latin for crown. So you may have heard of the coronavirus, and that's actually named for the shape of the virus, and it has this crown-like shape, like a king wearing a crown. So that's that. Anyway, and then we see the difference between the male and the female, and this is a female, and generally they're larger. But the most important thing about them is the male has this brood pouch. Okay, this is just another picture showing the names of those fins and the names of those spines and all of those little segments. And that's kind of an important thing because if a scientist is going to identify a species that they find when they're out scuba diving and studying fish, and by the way, someone who studies fish is called an ichthyologist. So if an ichthyologist is out studying fish and they discover a new one they think is a new species, they're going to look at some of these things because each species has different numbers of spines and different shapes and sizes of those spines. And they also have different numbers of these tail segments, as well as a few other things. Okay, so what's so special about seahorses? Here we have two seahorses. We're looking at a male and a female, and they're on a date. So they're doing what's called courting. So they're courting each other. When a male and a female get together, they usually are together for a whole season and sometimes their whole lives. And they wake up every morning and they do this little dance in the water and they curl those long tails around each other. And they curl their tails around the algae or the coral to help keep them in one place because they're not very fast swimmers. They're not like a trout or a salmon or a tuna. So they have to hold on with that long tail. And so what happens is the female, she still makes eggs and the male still makes sperm, just like any other animal. But instead of the male giving the female his sperm, the female gives the male her eggs, and she puts them in a little pouch. So it's almost like a kangaroo kind of, although kangaroo boys don't have the babies. They just keep them warm and protected there. So the female gives the male the eggs, and the male incubates the eggs. He actually goes through a real pregnancy. And so after a few weeks, depending on the species, the babies are born, like you see in this illustration here. And there's just maybe up to a few hundred babies are born, and they're very tiny. They're smaller than your pinky finger. In fact, some species of seahorses are only as big as your pinky finger when they're adults. So the boy gives birth. I would love to be a seahorse. Let the boy have the babies. I'll take care of them afterwards. Anyway, the boy releases the eggs the juveniles into the water column. And you can imagine how they can't swim either. So they often float for miles and miles and miles. Sometimes they get attached to floating seaweed and plankton, and they can float for miles. And then perhaps weeks later, they will grow up big enough to kind of settle down into the bottom and hopefully find an appropriate habitat, coral reef or something like that. So now I want to mention that we're talking about seahorses, right? So they're within the group of fishes. And then within that group, there's a few things that aren't seahorses, but they're close cousins. And one of them are called pipefish. And pipefish live along the California coast where I used to live in Monterey Bay. And you can see them at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, along with other more tropical things like the leafy sea dragon. I used to work at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, so I like to mention them. Anyway, so this guy, when they are living in the seagrass beds that are very close to the shore in very shallow, calm water, they blend in perfectly with their environment. They're the exact same color as the green eelgrass that they rest in. So that's one, a pipefish. And then here's another one that is from the tropics. And I've been able to see this guy once when I was snorkeling. It was really cool. And they look really scary. And they have this yellow goatee that comes out their chin. I'm not sure what that's for, but they're not scary. They can be up to a foot long or more. But they can't hurt you. They can't bite. In fact, that's one of the things about all the seahorses and their relatives is they have very weak jaws, and they can usually just suck food up, and they can't really bite it. And then another close relative of seahorses is called a cornet fish. And this guy looks really scary, but he's different than the other fish. If you notice, one obvious thing is down here, he's got this really long filament that goes beyond his tail. And that's one way that you can really easily tell the difference between him and see the pipefish. His tail just ends like in a regular tail. And the seahorse, this other pipefish, just ends in a small tail. Okay, so how are we doing so far here? Now, one of my favorite relatives of seahorses is called the sea dragon, and these guys live in the warm tropical forest, no, not warm tropical coral reefs of Southeast Asia and Australia. And they're often called a leafy sea dragon because they have all these leaf-like structures that come off of them. Super, super cool. Yes, Selena says it looks like a cross between an alligator and a fish. Okay. And Abby says, is that a stinger? No. So none of the seahorses or their relatives can sting. In fact, they have really no way to protect themselves. They don't have toxins like the frogs we looked at yesterday. So, and they can't swim very fast. They're pretty tiny usually, so they don't have a whole lot of predators. There are fish and octopus that will eat them, but so they have to rely on camouflage. Most of them have to look more like their environment. And so you can see with the sea dragon that these leafy parts are really blending in with this algae in their habitat. So animals usually go one of two ways. They either have really cryptic coloration, or camouflaged coloration, that is, so they can hide from their predators, or they have bright warning colors like the red-eyed tree frog or the poison dart frogs we saw yesterday, or the ladybug we saw the day before. And here's another leafy sea dragon. Aren't they gorgeous? So you can imagine that they couldn't swim very fast with all of those leaves coming out. Those are specifically meant to camouflage them so that they can look like their habitat and not be eaten. And here's another one, because I just couldn't help myself. Aren't they so beautiful? And later on at the end, you might want to come back and try drawing one of these leafy sea dragons after we try drawing an easier seahorse first. So yeah, we're just going to look at a few examples of true seahorses now. So you have seen some examples of different colors of seahorses. So they can be a wide range of colors, and so they can be, yellows and greens and pinks and purples and reds, just depending on their genetics and their habitat and their lifestyle. Oh yeah, Abby said it looks like a rainbow. Now, who can find the seahorse in this picture? So this seahorse is a pygmy seahorse. Obviously, it's very tiny, and it is so perfectly camouflaged that it looks just like the pink coral that it grows among. So can anybody see the seahorse? You might look for a little black eye spot. Good. Yeah. There he is. So he's right. Here's his eye and his head and the rest of his body. Isn't that an amazing example of evolution? This species has evolved to become more like its habitat so that it can camouflage itself. And the more it looks camouflaged, each individual, if he looks more camouflaged than others, then he's going to survive and not be eaten by the predators. And if he survives, that means he's going to pass on those genetics to his young, to his juveniles, and they too will become more and more camouflaged and safer in their environment. So that's a great example of evolution. And here's another one that sort of looks like his habitat, although it's not lit as well in the back, but you can see the red corals. And this is a red seahorse with red and white dots on it. Okay, and then here's an example of the tropical coral reefs. So just a little bit about the habitats. So seahorses can live in a lot more places than you think. Most people think of seahorses, they think of coral reefs like these pictures in the tropics, right near the equator, but they live a lot more places. Oh, yes. Selena says the candy corn seahorse. Yeah. And so seahorses can even live really close to shore. Like I mentioned, that pipefish lives in the quiet estuaries along California where the seagrass beds grow. And this is a picture of a mangrove habitat. Mangroves are types of trees that grow right in the water, and they help protect the ocean and the land from big hurricanes by protecting that water and that habitat. And seahorses live here too. In fact, I was really lucky enough once when I was in the Caribbean to see a seahorse just in about a foot of water, just like this. And here's another example of habitats. But seahorses don't just live in the coral reefs or on the coasts. They can live as far north as England and Washington here in the northern North America. And they can live all the way down south towards Africa and Argentina. So fewer species live at those latitudes, but there still are species. And this picture shows a yellow seahorse. And with this one, you can see how long these spines are compared to the other ones. And they also kind of help him camouflage to look more like his habitat. Now, seahorses have lots of things that are threatening them in the wild, and many of them are going extinct. And of course, one thing we can do as humanity is try not to pollute as much. So lots of pollution gets in the ocean, including plastic bags. And so this is kind of a sad picture of a seahorse with a plastic bag, but just to help you know that you should try to reduce and reuse and recycle, especially plastics. And then also to know that lots of seahorses are captured. And so don't ever buy a dried seahorse that you might see at a store someplace. That would be a bad thing. You want to keep them alive and in the ocean so they don't go extinct. Okay, I'm going to end this broadcast now. Bye.